Syrian rebels reportedly fired poison gas at a residential area in government-controlled western Aleppo today, killing one and injuring 35 more. Civilian losses continue to mount in Yemen as suspected Saudi-led coalition airstrikes killed dozens of people on Saturday. And in one of the big stories of the week, fires and fighting, migrants resisted being evicted from the massive jungle camp in Calais as it was finally demolished. Hi, live from Moscow, it's Kevin Owen with you this hour and our news review of the week in the weekly. And the news starts again this hour today in Syria. There's breaking news from there, in fact, today to tell you about first. Rebels in Syria today, it's been reported this morning, allegedly shelled residential areas in the government-held part of Aleppo with poison gas. However, a representative for the rebels has denied that accusation. But according to Syrian state media, one person has been killed and another 35 injured. We've had this exclusive footage through from the hospital where the victims are being treated. Doctors believe the civilians were poisoned with chlorine gas.
The injured we are treating show signs of chlorine poisoning. They have breathing difficulties and damage to their eyes. All patients have been provided with necessary medical care. We've given them oxygen masks and medicine. Those with more serious injuries have been taken to hospital.
So how dangerous is chlorine poisoning? Well, it causes fluid on the lungs. It also frequently leads to a loss of vision and burns. High concentrations can be lethal. The chlorine gas attack took place in residential areas at Al Hamdaniya district, which has frequently come under fire from rebels previously. As you can see on the map, it's a government-controlled area. Here's how one of the victims described the incident today.
We were in a residential area when we came under mortar fire. They also attacked us from armored vehicles. When surrounded, we were pounded by shells, and they used poison gas on us.
Bassam Abdullah is joining us now, political analyst. Bassam, thanks for your time. Chlorine gas is a banned substance. How do you think the rebels, if this is true, got hold of it?
Thank you very much for having me. And I think that the whole world should be now see what's going on in the southwestern part of Aleppo, where these terrorists is using chemical weapons again. And besides that, I think the Russian envoy in the United Nations asked the United Nations Security Council to expand the authority of the committee which is responsible for that, because we know that during the last days it was a huge pressure against Syrian government about using chemical weapons. And we know that this story because this is not first time. If we remember, I want to mention that in 2013 in the eastern part of Ghouta, they used the sarin gas at that time, and we know this story through the story which was published from Seymour Hersh in many Western media, and we know the role of Hillary Clinton, the role of the American ambassador in Benghazi, and how they transferred these kind of poison gases to these terrorists. So we are in front of a very dangerous situation. I think here the Security Council of the United Nations should be stop this kind of using, and we know that we should know that we are in front terrorist, not moderate opposition. We are in front of terrorist groups, which they are not respecting, not international law, not anything. So please let's the world to see what's going on. Not beside that, they are every day and every night attacking the western part of Aleppo, while at the same time the Syrian army with the Russian, they stopped either the air forces, using the air forces attacks. They opened 8 exits for for civilian people from the eastern part to go outside, while we know that the terrorists, they prevent anyone to leave the eastern part of Aleppo. Now we are in front of this kind of a story. I think the Western public opinion should see what's going on. At the same time, we are not using that for the media only. There is a very difficult situation. Besides that, I don't think that the Turkestan and Uzbek and Chechen, they are moderate opposition who are fighting now in the eastern part of Aleppo.
So if this is proved, as we've been saying, this would be the second time this particular Al-Hamdinea district's been targeted by the rebels. If it is proved, do you think the West will reassess its support for these groups?
Yes, I think all these kind of weapons they are getting from the Western allies of these groups. We know that United States openly, after the Russian-American agreement, they withdraw from this agreement, and they are supporting these people. They are calling them moderate opposition. I don't know how they are moderate opposition. We are in front of Takfiri and Wahhabi movements, and we are in front of foreigners. We are in front of Al-Nusra front, which is classified as a terrorist organization in the United Nations. So I think now we are in a very difficult situation for the Western allies of these groups. If they are speaking about a political solution, I think the Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs declared that Syrian government is ready for that. But for combating terrorism, I don't think that the Syrian government will stop fighting against terrorism. We should differ between these people or the political opposition, which is absolutely another thing, but not these groups.
So thanks for being with us today, Bassam Abdullah, political analyst, live on the line. In a separate incident, 7 people have been killed, including 3 children, in rebel shelling. That's according to a Syrian state media report. Syrian rebels have been intensifying their assault against government forces in and around the war-ravaged city of Aleppo. Opposition groups, along with al-Nusra terrorists and other hardliners, launched a massive offensive on Friday to push back the Syrian military. An RT crew has been filming in the government-held western part of Aleppo this week, which is under constant shelling from the rebels. Throughout the week, they've been sending us video of the attacks, a warning some of the pictures coming up here you may find distressing. But it's not only bombing raids that the war-torn city suffers from. These children you're seeing here of my shoulder have got one thing in common: they've all got cancer. Many of them are dying from forms of a disease that's perfectly treatable elsewhere if caught in time. It's not the case in Aleppo, as Murad Gazdi has been finding out.
Selling cancer medicine to Syria is a criminal act thanks to European and American sanctions. Or any other life-saving drugs too, for the matter. Or even medical equipment. And children are dying for it.
انت خايف شيء؟ ليش ما خايف؟
انه ما بخاف من شيء.
انت خايف شيء لانك انت مريض؟
لا. لا، انا بدي اقضي على المرض.
They're brave, and they'll need to be. Of the roughly 200 children with cancer in Aleppo, 30 have died, and only 9 have survived the disease.
Almost all the children who've died of cancer have done so because of European sanctions. We asked the European Union and humanitarian agencies to lift the sanctions and let cancer medicine in because children are suffering.
For 4 years, Europe has ignored those pleas, and the casualties among the innocent are mounting. This is 3-year-old Wafa. She had eye cancer. They could have treated it, but Western sanctions made getting the medicine impossible. And the only hospital that specialized in cancer in Aleppo, Kindi Hospital, was taken by rebels and destroyed in fighting. They had to amputate her eye, but she's fine now. She lived. Many other kids won't. For a year, she lived with an empty eye socket, until this organization, Cancer Care Syria, saved enough money to buy her a new one. It changed her life.
She said, "Look at me. I have my second eye. Now nobody will stare at me strangely."
CCS doesn't get international grants or media headlines. They don't boast. They just save and enhance lives as best they can. They look happy here, but bear this in mind. A year from now, some of these kids will be gone. Morad Gazdiev, RT in Aleppo.
At least 300 civilians have been killed in airstrikes conducted by the US-led coalition in Syria over the past 2 years, according to an investigation by Amnesty International. The human rights group cited information from various sources, including eyewitnesses. Amnesty says the harm caused by US-led operations in Syria is being significantly underestimated. And it's high time, it went on to say, America came clean over the extent to which civilians are being affected by coalition strikes. Furthermore, the group says it sent its findings to the US State Department a month ago and is still waiting any reaction. RT's Gani Tuchikan asked officials why there's been no response.
Why the silence?
Well, I would refer you to my Defense Department colleagues on this. As you know, we take seriously all credible allegations of civilian casualties. The Pentagon has a system, a fairly comprehensive system for analyzing themselves what these allegations are, and then when they feel that they warrant further investigation, they do it.
The 27-page memorandum which Amnesty sent to the Pentagon details nearly a dozen cases where coalition operations in Syria appear to have gone awry. The memo notes, quote, "For several incidents, no military objective could be discerned, and reports indicate that the only casualties were civilian." Goes on to say the loss of civilian life was so high in a few attacks that it is difficult to see how a significant enough military advantage could have been anticipated that would have outweighed the risk to civilians, end quote. More than a third of the deaths Amnesty reported were the result of coalition operations to liberate the areas in and around the city of Manbij from ISIL. In one village of Al-Tukhar, Amnesty estimates the strikes killed 73 civilians, including 27 children. Amnesty's memo to U.S. officials also notes, quote, "Based on Amnesty International's research and analysis, some attacks known or suspected to have been carried out by coalition forces may have violated international humanitarian law."
Neil Salmons, who worked on that report, says the US-led coalition is still reluctant to investigate airstrikes.
The US-led coalition has not taken adequate steps to check who is in the strike locations before they take place. They may have been fed and perhaps not checked adequately enough intelligence provided from perhaps the Syrian Democratic Forces or other allies on the ground, and hit unclear targets but killing scores of civilians. Until now, the big picture in Syria is that they are not investigating thoroughly enough. They are not aware, as they should be, of the amount of civilians they have killed, and it does mean that it's quite possible that they will be killing more civilians in their campaign to retake Mosul from Islamic State.
Meanwhile, in more of the news of the week, in Yemen, Saudi-led coalition warplanes struck a prison 3 times on Saturday in the city of Hodeidah. That killed at least 60. That information came from medical sources on the ground. The entire prison building was destroyed. No word yet from any coalition representatives about it. Also Saturday, a Saudi airstrike hit a residential area in the western city of Taiz. At least 17 civilians, including 11 members of the same family, died in that attack, according to local officials and residents. Earlier this month, one of the deadliest Saudi-led airstrikes took place, which the coalition later admitted was a mistake based on, quote, wrong information. Despite various concerns over the kingdom's record, Saudi Arabia has been re-elected nonetheless onto the UN Human Rights Council this week. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch earlier called to suspend Riyadh from the council due to what they called systematic violations. The organisations also noted that Saudi Arabia is abusing its seat at the UN body to avoid accountability over possible war crimes committed in Yemen. Hussein al-Bukaiti, a pro-Houthi activist and a Yemeni journalist, spoke to us and says Saudi Arabia's allies are blocking any independent inquiry from taking place.
The Saudi is conducting this with the full support of the United States, and this is not only the first time they target a prison. The Saudi does not care, and on the top of that, they are awarded and elected twice during the war in Yemen to be a member of the Human Rights Council, and as well in the third or fourth month of the war in Yemen, they were elected to head the Human Rights Panel, and I think that the Human Rights Panel is part in this war, and the Human Rights Panel and their crime is bigger than the Saudi, and as well the UK, they have blocked twice an international investigation into Yemen, into all crimes, either by Houthi or Ali Abdullah Saleh forces or coalition force, but they blocked this, and I think this is the main problem that we have with the international community.
However, unlike Saudi Arabia, Russia lost its seat on the UN Human Rights Council on Friday. It failed to garner enough General Assembly votes following numerous accusations that Russia's committing war crimes in Syria, which Moscow rejects. A few days before the UN Human Rights Council vote there, a group of NGOs, including Human Rights Watch, signed an appeal calling for Russia to lose its place. In the week, Rory Soucé discussed that with the regional director of one of those groups, the Syrian Relief Network.
Russia does not belong to the Human Rights Council. It should be on the other side of the table where they are questioned about their actions, especially in Syria.
As you well know, working there in Syria, Russia has proposed numerous times to work with America, to have America help Russia to escort the civilians out of Aleppo. However, every time Russia makes that proposal, America says no.
Russia is among other parties that impeded the latest medical evac effort we tried to do in Aleppo and refused completely to channel any aid.
Can you give us some information on how this happened? Because we believe the Ministry of Defence has been trying to be transparent in this. Maybe you could give us some evidence of your concerns here.
We always demanded to channel aid into any besieged city in addition to evacuation of the injured. However, from the Russian side, the offer was only to get those injured outside the city without any aid going in.
What about the militants? Because we understand the militants, extremists, mercenaries, terrorists, they're using civilians as human shields. We understand they've also been preventing them from leaving as well. Where do you apportion the blame, Dr. Derry?
We condemn any act that prevents human aid from getting to the population or medical evacs. However, during the negotiations, we always find that the superpowers, namely Russia, is the one that keep impeding. They are trying to impose very harsh rules and conditions to get any aid in or patients out. From the other side, eventually we can get some sort of cooperation. But I would say it again, the most problematic thing is the continuous bombardment.
To take your own words, the continuous bombardment. We have reports every day of militant shells being shot from eastern Aleppo into the safely government-controlled western Aleppo. You're telling me you condemn all acts of violence, but you're not condemning the militants who are killing civilians.
We're not denying that fact, and we condemn it day and night. Targeting civilians from all parties is a crime against humanity. We cannot tolerate it. So we're not siding with one side over another.
You're one of the NGOs calling for Russia to essentially be booted off the UNHRC, and yet you don't have any problem with Saudi Arabia, which ultimately has one of the most dismal human rights records on our planet.
I have enough evidence to object on Russia's nomination. However, I'm quite happy to address the matter of Saudi Arabia if you can provide me with the same evidence I have here regarding targeting civilians or committing crimes or anything against human rights.
In More of the Week just gone, we look at what's left of one of the biggest refugee camps in Europe. It's coming up.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story, or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
It's quite common for Europeans to struggle to understand Russia's moves. But the opposite is increasingly true as well. The European Union has never faced so many challenges at once, and yet it has never shown so much passivity in addressing them. Has Europe become too big to fend for itself?
Again, so this last week, the notorious jungle camp in Calais was almost completely razed to the ground by French government bulldozers. Once Europe's largest makeshift refugee camp, it was home to over 6,000 migrants. Many of them refused to leave without a fight. By midweek, a number of large fires were started by some of the evicted migrants who torched their makeshift homes in protest. Covering it all, RT's Harry Fear was there as the unrest developed.
Well, as you may be able to see behind me, some of the fire trucks and rescue crews that attended to the scene eventually to deal with the massive fire. It's now been put out, and the police also attended to the scene in order to secure it for the fire crews to move in. Well, you can see perhaps just over here to my right that there are a couple of migrants that had to evacuate the camp, and the police forced them out. Others have been going back in. But suddenly the lack of speed and apparent lack of willingness to tackle some of the sort of crises in the camp, in a sense epitomised by the slow response tonight to the fire engulfing the structures. Of course, French authorities, as have the British authorities, been leaving it to aid groups, charities and random volunteers to do much of the groundwork, taking care of the humanitarian concerns of the inhabitants here for years. So perhaps then it shouldn't really surprise us that they came and arrived again so late to the game tonight to deal with this massive fire. This is what remains of the scene, an extraordinary situation, because there are now then tens dozens of migrants sleeping out here now on the tarmac in what used to be the kind of western edge of the western sector of the jungle. So extraordinary that these guys kind of have been evicted by fire tonight. It just speaks to the chaos and lack of management and security on such a precarious site. And the buzzword of the moment, or at least the buzzword of day 2 of the closure of the camp, has been confusion.
More of the big stories of the week. The Democratic camp slammed FBI Director James Comey after he announced the reopening of a probe into Hillary Clinton earlier this week. The presidential nominee hit out at the agency, though, back at it in a campaign speech on Saturday.
It's pretty strange to put something like that out with such little information right before an election. In fact, it's not just strange, it's unprecedented, and it is deeply troubling.
Comey addressed a letter to several members of Congress explaining that the agency uncovered new emails that could be important for the investigation. But he didn't specify the source of the finding at the time. It was later revealed, though, that the FBI got them from a phone belonging to the husband of a Clinton aide. However, that didn't stop one Democratic Party member from nonetheless suggesting that Russia could once again be involved.
The question is, where did these documents come from? How did they get to the FBI? Is Russia involved in this? We don't have any clue of where this stuff is coming from.
On top of that, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee tweeted that the FBI director had destroyed the Bureau's credibility forever and that Comey's put himself on the same side as the Russian president. We spoke to Robin Conner from the WatchingAmerica.com publishing agency, who thinks that throwing accusations before getting the facts has become common practice in the US.
This is the Muppet Show of the US presidency. It is political silly season, and people say what suits them and suits their side before they get the data, right? This is what we've been used to now in the United States for months. We just heard from this congressman who throws out this claim very loosely about Russia and, and if he honestly believes that American federal law enforcement is somehow, this corrupted by contact with Russia, then he should be racing through the halls of the Capitol trying to get a huge national investigation going. In this election, I don't think anybody really is voting for Clinton or for Trump. The overwhelming majority of the population will be voting against one or against the other, against the one that they feel to be the more dangerous. It's a sad state of affairs.
Right ahead, a variety of programmes, depending where we're watching around the world. And Art International, we hear from the activists fighting the construction of oil pipelines across the US. If from the UK or Ireland, we're taking a look at a rehab camp for internet addicts in China.